It is the Doomsday Podcast. Warder and Mosley, just moments after the Cowboys dominating 30-14 win in Charlotte over the Carolina Panthers. And Ed, so much working against the Cowboys coming into this game, demoralizing loss on Monday Night Football. You play on the short week. You get the bad news yesterday that Trayvon Diggs is out for the season-ending surgery that's got to take place. And on top of it was the the first time the Panthers had been picked to win, that they were favored by Vegas in a game since 2022. So you had that indignity, and the Cowboys come out, Ed, even after that disastrous ending to the first half, and they get a decisive win. So, Ed, it was, it seems like from a playoff perspective, all that stuff is lost, right? And so at this point, it's like whatever you're playing for, pride, next season, trying, seeing some players, seeing some younger players, whatever you're looking to see. But it ended up being a very dominant, especially on the defensive side of the ball, performance by the Cowboys. So a nice response after what happened on Monday.
Yeah, being out at the Star a couple times this week, Mike McCarthy described the mood after the loss Monday night to Cincinnati as being one of the heaviest he'd felt in the Cowboys locker room in his 5 seasons as the head coach. And so I think between essentially losing a game that they knew they had to win to be relevant and have any reasonable chance of making the playoffs, even though that was going to be like a 1% chance, combining the loss to Cincinnati and the way it happened on that fateful play on special teams, losing DeMarvion Overshown for the season, and then yesterday finding out Trayvon Diggs is also out for the year. I think that if there was any quit in this team, it would have come in this game today. Now, I'm not saying they're going to win out because their next 3 games are against teams that, have playoff ambitions, and they're going to be highly motivated, and the Cowboys are still decimated by injuries. But, Mike McCarthy and his coaching staff, they're on expiring contracts. So they're in their last 4 games when this game began today. And so they're going to be fully invested. They're going to prioritize winning, and they have. The question was, well, how are the players going to respond? And it was a very favorable response. Like you said, keep in mind their opponent's 3-10. So there was a real indignity for the Cowboys coming off 3 12-win seasons to be the first opponent in 33 games to be an underdog against the Carolina Panthers, who haven't had a winning season since 2017. But the Cowboys had to play on the road on a short week. Worth noting, for all of Mike McCarthy's failures, his team has now won 10 straight short week games. They're 4-0 this year on a short week. That's the best record in the NFL under those circumstances. But I thought the thing that they did, before we get into too much detail, they scored first, they led the game throughout, and that really allowed them to play to their strengths, which was running the football on offense and pass rushing on defense. And we saw the results of that. Rico Dowdle, 3rd straight game with the career high rushing total. And then Mike Zimmer's decimated defense still coming up with, 6 sacks and 4 takeaways. Pretty incredible stuff when you consider, how many starters are out of the lineup on both sides of the ball.
All right. I think what I'm hearing is this may be one of the best short week coaches in the history of the game. And if the schedule makers would just simply give the Cowboys even more short weeks, this team would really, really be going. Now, Ed, what's going to be interesting is, we'll talk more about this, but if they got 4 games left, if they get to 8-9 or 9-8 or something like that, there is going to be talk. There already is kind of talk of this, but McCarthy somehow got this decimated team to finish right around 500, and that would embolden Jerry to perhaps bring him back, which just a few weeks ago seemed highly unlikely. It does seem a little more likely, especially after today and after the how many 3 wins in the last 4 games? Is that right?
Well, yeah, they've won 3 of their last 4, and in getting to 6-8, they've won now as many games with Cooper Rush, the starting quarterback, as they have with Dak Prescott. 3 for each. And of course, Cooper Rush had a career high 3 touchdown passes in this game today.
Yeah, and improves to 5-1 as a
and I
starter.
still think he may have played his way off the roster, but we'll talk more about that.
Okay, I was just about to praise him as you kick him in the.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
5-1 on the road. One of the great road quarterbacks in the NFL.
If only they didn't have to play all these damn home games.
All right, Mike Hamilton from Rogue Media. Now would be the appropriate time. Please play the music. All right. Order. This was interesting. I mean, we'll start with the defensive performance, and things got interesting as only the Cowboys can. Ed, I will say, well, before we do that, I'll just say, in typical form, they're up 10-0 down there before the half, trying to go in there, and it looks like they might
make it a 3-score game before the half.
17-0 at half, which, I mean, I felt like the announcers were already kind of getting bored, thinking, oh my gosh, what do we have to talk about the rest of this game? And then trouble hits in the form of red zone turnovers. And it was the simplest of, it was an RPO and the
Why is Cooper Rush running an RPO? What's Trey Lance for?
The Trey Lance package has hit the ditch for some reason. They've abandoned it. And so they try an RPO with Cooper Rush, and Eddie executes it beautifully. It's going to go back to pass, but then hits Dowdle in the hip with the ball as Dowdle comes by and put it on the ground. And the Panthers, the guy's just like, oh, look what I found. And then trouble hits immediately as the Panthers hit on an 83-yard touchdown. Ed, as great as they were throughout the game with the pass rush, we'll talk plenty about that. This team has some major issues, whether it be at the end of games, end of halves. It's like they can play an entire half of really good defensive football, and then they give up these crazy, huge plays. And in this one, it looked like Aurier, who had to be in there because of Diggs and everybody else that's out. As Olsen pointed out, it looked like he should have stayed with the receiver going deep, and it left Wilson to try to chase him down, and he had no chance. I believe the receiver's name is Coker. He's an undrafted guy.
Jalen Coker.
Yeah. And so anyway, that was a disastrous set of events. That the only turnaround was the fact that the Panthers turned around their first possession and immediately gave it back to the Cowboys. So that was
in the third quarter. Yeah, the Cowboys
correct.
Dominated their third quarter, but that was a brutal sequence because Cooper Rush's fumble wasn't really the result of any kind of defensive contact or pressure. It was just a failure to execute the simplest thing as a quarterback. And it's the 9th time the Cowboys have turned the ball over in the red zone this year. That's the most in the NFL. And the reason I said earlier that, Cooper Rush in a 3-touchdown pass game, the first of his career, maybe should have distinguished himself, and instead, I think puts himself at risk is he's had 9 fumbles this year and 3 interceptions. That is incredibly bad for a quarterback who's so physically limited. He really shortens the passing game, and he's been pretty inaccurate in executing that. And then you're going to turn the ball over on top of that? That just can't happen. And it's been way too frequent an occurrence this year with Cooper Rush for reasons I don't know that have been explained. Fumbling that many times, he's played half the games. It's a ridiculous total. And so if he can't protect the football better than that, I wouldn't be surprised if the Cowboys don't look for somebody better, even though that probably isn't going to be Trey Lance, given the obvious disinterest among the coaching staff of the front office in seeing him play under any circumstances, because the Cowboys are largely out of contention in the playoffs. But I just think that for all he did in terms of throwing those 3 touchdown passes and what they were to CeeDee Lamb, who who had another terrific game, and I think really has distinguished himself as a competitor and a leader in the locker room in a time when they really needed it. He's playing with that AC joint injury and has for ever since the Atlanta game when Dak went out for the rest of the year. And he's produced. This was the Cowboys' first 100-yard rushing game and 100-yard receiving game with Dowdle and Lamb since 2022. So that is impressive that Lamb has continued to play with all of the other star players, big money guys. 5 of the top 7 highest paid players on this roster are on IR. That CeeDee Lamb, even though this season is going nowhere, and he's already made his money, he's gotten his second contract, the second highest paid receiver in football, he continues to compete. Now, maybe he won't play anymore after this game, now that I've said all that, but I'm impressed as somebody who interacts with him and questions him on a weekly basis out there that he's continued to play and to perform at the level we've seen.
Ed, we did get the entertaining situation where the Cowboys, Cooper slid right before the half, and then they raced up to the line of scrimmage to spike the football and to clock it, and they ran out the kicker, and Aubrey attempted a 70-yard field goal, and I think we've all wanted to see what that would look like, what it would feel like, and quite honestly, it didn't get that close because the guy
we're short left.
Yeah, the guy.
I mean, it's outdoors. It's asking a lot.
I think
I think it's something we've all wanted to see.
We've all wanted to see it. We've seen it now.
We don't need to see it anymore.
Like. I know. You need to wait till you're like in Colorado in the thin air. That's the best place to try one of those. And it did lead to a funny graphic in the second half as he was getting ready to hit like a 41-yard field goal, and they kind of summarized his kicks. And it said the ones he'd made, and then it said missed 70 yards.
But he did make a 52-yarder. He's made 11 field goals from 50-plus yards. Yeah. That's the most in a single season in franchise history and the second most in NFL history. And as for the 70-yarder, to put that in some kind of context, it's only the 8th time in the history of the league that an NFL kicker has attempted such a long kick. And the first time since 2021 when Brandon McManus of the Broncos tried from 70 yards. So the longest attempt in league history, Sebastian Janikowski, 76 yards in 2008.
Wait, that's the longest attempt
ever, 76 yards by Sebastian Janikowski.
What's the longest field goal made ever?
He's 1 yard short of it. Aubrey's 1 yard short of it. Isn't it 66 yards?
Okay, 66 is the. I was just trying to think of what's the record, but yeah, that sounds right. He's come very close to it. Because he's made how many in the 60s? He's made several now. I think he's made at least 3 over the last couple of seasons from that range. And we've seen he's now turned 52-yarders into complete chip shots. You heard the announcers talking about it, and we just totally expect him. And it's very easy for him.
Yeah, Justin Tucker, I looked it up to confirm, 66 yards in 2021. He can't make anything now, but he was the most accurate kicker in all football, but he does still have the record for the longest at 66 yards. We know for decades, it was Tom Dempsey.
Yeah.
But now it's 66 yards, and Aubrey is right there, but he didn't make that one.
I like that the guys in the 70s and 80s that would do it were doing it barefoot. Like Tony Franklin. He could totally nail stuff from 60 yards. And that changed, by the way, the rules forever in college because Tony Franklin made a couple of 60-yarders, and the opposing coach got mad enough that's when, at least in college, Ed, they started the defense got to take over where the hold was from instead of the line of scrimmage because they got tired of Tony hitting those 60-yarders on them. It is the Doomsday Podcast. Werder and Mosley breaking down the Cowboys' 30-14 win in Charlotte. And Ed, the defense for the Cowboys was outstanding. 6 sacks. Micah Parsons probably had his best game of the year. He had 2 sacks. There was a strip sack in there. There were like all sorts of quarterback,
Osi Odigizua.
Oh, he was awesome.
Was a very prominent. He had 2 sacks and a strip sack that led to a score. I think the Cowboys scored 10 points off takeaways today.
Yeah.
Odigizua has like 20 pressures now. from his interior defensive line position the last 4 games, which is among the most in the NFL among defensive tackles. And he's another guy who's, in a contract year. So the Cowboys are going to have a decision to make on him in the offseason.
Yeah. And I'm sure they'll reset the market with whatever they're going to pay him. Now, of course, there's all talk about Parsons going into the final year of his contract, and that was some of the talk going into this game. I do find it. Let's stick with Osa Odigizua for a second, Ed. Isn't that interesting when you hear like national people say something and you're kind of sitting there and you're like, I guess that's true. But it's still weird for me to hear somebody say, this guy is one of the best interior pass rushers in the NFL. We just kind of have looked at this defense as just makeshift, try to get through the season. Earlier this year, they had Lawson, they had Golston, Odigizua. I mean, they had so many injuries that it was just down to we didn't even know some of these players. And so somehow through all this crazy injury-laden season, Odigizua has risen to the point where he's now referred to, and you just, backed it up with some points. But, I mean, that's an interesting thing to hear somebody say. This guy is the best at what he does in the NFL, or one of the best. That's not what we thought of him coming into this season. So he certainly is having a career season.
Yeah, he's distinguished himself. He's created a lot of value for himself, whether it's in Dallas or someplace else, in terms of getting a second contract. What was he drafted, like 4th round out of UCLA in 2020? Chauncey Golston recovered the fumble that Odigizua caused. He's another guy who's played extremely well. They like him on the edge more than they do inside, although he's capable of playing both positions. And you kind of forget that, DeMarcus Lawrence went out in week 4 after the Giants game and hasn't come back, and they haven't started his 21-day practice window, although he's out, working his rehab on the field now with Britt Brown. So you don't even know if he's going to come back at all for these last 3 games, and given the relative inconsequential nature of them, it wouldn't surprise me he doesn't play again. He's another guy they have to make a decision on contractually, but he led the team in sacks with 3 for quite a while after he and Micah were both out of the lineup. So, yeah, I think what we have seen from Mike Zimmer is really impressive. I mean, they got off to a bad start. They had those historic, embarrassing losses at home where they weren't competitive. But to do what he has with as many starters who have been out, as has been the case, plus transitioning to a new defensive scheme, I think Mike Zimmer has really demonstrated, what he's capable of all these years later. And even if Mike McCarthy is not brought back, if he's not extended, depending on who the next coach would be, I could certainly see Jerry trying to do something that he's done frequently that almost no other owner ever does, which is keep somebody and force them on the next head coach. I could certainly, especially if it's like somebody like Kellen Moore. Like Kellen might not really have somebody he wants as his defensive coordinator, and Jerry could, like I said, this depends on the decision they make with McCarthy. But I think Moore is going to be a viable candidate should that happen. And one of the reasons would be his play calling expertise, his history with the Jones family, his success with Dak and this group of players, and the fact that maybe he would allow defensive continuity in terms of allowing Zimmer to be his defensive coordinator.
What you're saying is Jerry wants to hire somebody that he can control like normal. I mean, that's whatever makes him comfortable.
Well, when is that? I mean, there have been few situations where that wasn't the case.
I'm just saying he wants to do the usual other than the Bill Parcells hire.
I know that's not going to happen if you hire Mike Vrabel.
Hey, by
it's
the
not
way,
going to happen if you hire Bill Belichick.
When Belichick took the UNC job, and because I was just reading that quote, I didn't see, you were probably there that day. Did you see Mike's reaction when he said, "This is great news"? Was he being funny?
No, I think that was his natural reaction was one of relief and, oh my gosh, this increases the potential for me to come back here.
I know. I just wondered if when he said it, if he kind of realized it in his face, if it was like he was kind of recognizing the joke,
we have to assume that Belichick would be well aware of the potential for a change here, and that if he was willing to reach out directly to the Jets, a team he despises more than any other,
correct,
that he would certainly have made sure he knew whether Dallas was going to make a change, and if the Cowboys did change Mike McCarthy out, whether he would be a top candidate for that job, and yet he still goes and takes the North Carolina job. So I'm sure McCarthy would interpret that as a positive statement about how Jerry feels about him, and it certainly enhances whatever possibility he has of coming back.
And at this point, Ed, if we were going to put a percentage on it, I think it's climbed back up to 50-50 for McCarthy and maybe even 60-40 toward McCarthy. Would you agree with those odds?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know, because it's still, to me, the thing Jerry won't be able to explain, and maybe he doesn't care, is you said that after this coach, after Mike McCarthy won 12 games 3 years in a row, that you were not going to extend his contract and you were going to force him to work the final year, which almost never happens in the NFL. You made that decision because he didn't have enough postseason success. And so now you're going to do it when they don't make the playoffs at all? Now, I know you can say, hey, we've had a historic number of injuries, with their most prominent players. And that's true. But McCarthy also told us after one of the games, after Dak was out, that, hey, we won 3 ball games with Dak, as if to say injuries are not going to be a factor in this decision. Like, I'm not giving him a year of grace just because he lost his quarterback, even though McCarthy could easily say almost any time in his 18 years in Green Bay and Dallas as a head coach, I think all but 2 or 3 of the times he's had a losing season were because he lost his starting quarterback. And the 2 years that he lost his starting quarterback in Dallas, year 1 and this year, are the 2 years he's going to probably finish with a losing record and miss the playoffs. And in the 3 seasons he had his quarterback, he made the playoffs every year and won 12 games. But I don't think Jerry can rationally explain that, and maybe he won't care. I thought Greg Olson made a great point on the broadcast today on the subject of McCarthy's return, and that is that it's easy to fire a guy or not bring him back in this case, but who can you get that's better? And how sure are you that they're going to be better? And the thing Jerry has to evaluate as he goes through this process is, do I still believe in this style of offense? Do I still believe throwing the football a vast majority of the time is what's going to win? Because the league is not doing that. The teams that are best in the NFL right now are teams that run the football. Detroit, the Eagles with Kellen Moore, the Ravens. They're all run-oriented teams. That's not what the Cowboys do. And it's not what they're ever going to do under Mike McCarthy, even though Rico Dowdle has 3 consecutive games with setting a career high. He's not going to emphasize running the football. So I thought that was a great point that Olson made. It's like, well, when you get in the playoffs, are you playing the style with your personnel that can win? And so far with Mike McCarthy, that's been a resounding no, because he's lost 3 of his 4 games, which is the worst postseason record in the NFL in the 4 years that he's been the head coach in Dallas. And the only win was against an opponent that was 8-9. So that sort of, it was Tom Brady, but it was the Tampa Bay Bucks. They were 8-9. The only team you beat in 4 playoff games was a team that didn't even have a winning record.
Yeah. In last year's, and it was even Jerry recently brought up the karma that can happen at the end of the year and talking about momentum and all. And he was the one who brought up, how every time we've tried to, at the start of this year, Ed, when we would bring up the playoff game, McCarthy and everybody and Dak would say, no, it's a separate season. Has nothing to do with that playoff game. And of course, it was Jerry who brings it up recently. Oh yeah, that playoff game, you could certainly see, you could argue that that's impacted what's happening this season.
Negative carryover effect is what he was saying.
That's right. The Ed, I did want to, while we were on the defense a minute ago, I wanted to bring up Maris Liufau, who was, has obviously had to take on a bigger role with Overshone out for the season and probably next season as well. And today, on a play where, it was a huge play in the game. It was a game-changing play. He comes in with one of those punch-out. He just puts was that Bryce going down?
It was Bryce Young, and he was inside the Cowboy 10-yard line in a scoreless game at the time.
And Maris Leofau just takes a punch at the ball, and the ball comes out. There's a big play for the Cowboys right there. And then Jordan Lewis, who appears to have an elbow injury, and we'll find out more throughout this week, but had to leave the game. But when he was still in the game, made a great play on the ball, and the ball gets tipped, and Kendricks gets that interception. So again, Ed, just a lot across the board, some tremendous defensive performances from this team.
Right. The first takeaway from Bryce Young, the fumble you talked about with Leofau, that was recovered by Marshawn Nealon. So you had two rookies combining on that takeaway. And then the other one you talked about, Jordan Lewis breaking up the pass intended for Adam Thielen, and deflecting the ball in the air, and Eric Kendricks intercepting it. That was two veteran players combining for a takeaway. And then they had the play at the end of the game for another interception. But, I think I'm surprised at how well this defense is playing. And I think it's a huge positive that the players have continued to compete through all the adversity that this team has faced this year. All those embarrassing blowout losses when they didn't, like, I think Micah Parsons changes everything. And so when I read quotes this morning from Stephen Jones that, hey, this Diggs injury and all the high value guys we have on IR makes you really rethink, whether you want to make a big commitment and pay a guy like Micah Parsons as the highest paid player on defense. Do you really want that much of your cap going to a handful of players who can be lost at any time? I think it would be incredibly foolish to let Micah Parsons go, to trade Micah Parsons for other players. He's shown you this year what you are with him and without him. And to me, it would be to say now all of a sudden, like, hey, we're not going to pay big money to a generational type of player at a position of huge importance on defense. We're not going to pay that money to a player, even though that player is Micah Parsons. It would be to me like 1998 when Jerry all of a sudden decided we are going to draft for character and missed Randy Moss in the draft. Mm-hmm. It would be to me the same thing. So I can't see them going that direction, no matter what Steven said today. I just don't see it. And it's unfortunate they've lost Trayvon Diggs, and it sounds like it's an 8-month recovery from this knee surgery that he's going to have. So, and you've already lost Overshown for probably all of next season. So it's going to be, a challenge this offseason.
They always say these things, Ed, though, because it's like they think it sort of impacts the negotiations. Hey, let's put it out there that we may not be able to break the bank for Micah. Ed, do you think whoever's representing Micah Parsons, that changes? Steven has a quote that doesn't know if he can continue to do that. Do you think that changes their position? No, not at all. And to your point, Micah Parsons, fair or not to say this, but obviously quarterback's more important even than an edge rusher. We know that.
That's the only position that's more important than an edge rusher.
But Micah is better at his position than Dak has been at his.
Oh yeah.
And he's one of the more dominant players in the game. And I think the good thing for the Cowboys and him, especially for him, given what Steven's trying to say, is that, early in the season, he was left trying to explain what was going on with the Cowboys, and he wasn't that effective. The defense was getting embarrassed at home. So he got a little time away from the team or away from the field. And the fact that he's come back on fire kind of regains, anything he may have lost during that time. The Cowboys were taking it on the chin to the Saints and the Ravens and everybody they lined up against. And he's gone back to being, one of the hardest guys to prepare for in the league.
And you mentioned his agent. His agent is David Mulugheta, he's one of the best in all of football. I mean, He's not Todd France, who's gotten these record deals for Dak Prescott, but he's very highly regarded, and he knows how to create and use leverage. And Micah already disadvantaged himself this week when he talked about how much he wants to be in Dallas and doesn't want to play somewhere else. And maybe he would take less to stay here. But I don't know how you could experience the 4 games you played without Micah Parsons this year and think that, oh, I could live without that as long as I got 2 or 3 first-round picks. I mean, you got one of the great players in football. His sack numbers are elite. Almost like a handful of players have as many sacks as he has at this point in their careers, and those guys are all in the Hall of Fame or soon will be. So I don't see how that makes any real sense whatsoever.
All right. It is time. And Ed, I took our good friend Blake Marable. We went to lunch the other day and we had a talk. Well, we talked about you, just talked about the podcast, how much he loves it. And this around the holidays. And in fact, first week in January, Ed, is when we're going to be filming some stuff over there. And I think you're going to enjoy, because finally, Ed, I get to show you some of those exteriors, the interiors. It's going to be wonderful to share with our audience, even through the off season. We'll be doing some great podcasts during the off season. But thank you to Marable Homes, Blake and Amy Marable, tremendous family out of Lake Highlands, and build homes in Preston Hollow, Highland Park, and wherever you need a home built, quite honestly. But luxury custom homes, we love having them, and you'll love these homes. And they've been a great sponsor over the last couple of seasons, and we appreciate them so much. I'm going on 3 seasons now, which we appreciate. And much like Ed, big tennis guy. Ed, we've been encountering a lot of tennis people. Ed played college tennis, in case you didn't know. And in fact, the other night we had some fans that kind of a studio audience up in our suite at the Cowboys game, and he was a tennis pro. And then the other guy was the one, Ed, that was dying to take pictures with you and that kind of thing. I think he was wondering why I was in the picture. He's like, could you just stand over there and let me have – at some point he wanted a solo one with you, which is fine. But Ed, it is time, though, for something we do on a weekly basis. People wait for it. They want to know what kind of grades he's handing out. I would think he would be somewhat positive today. It is time to talk to our resident scout and coach. Used to do both of those things for the Cowboys organization. It's time for Glenn Stretch Smith Stretch Plays. There he is. Stretch Plays. You hear him on WFAA. You hear him on Doomsday. It is Glenn Stretch Smith in the aftermath of this Cowboys 30-14 win. He's making notes as we speak. Stretch, welcome to Doomsday. And boy, speaking of Doomsday, that defense at times had that look. 6 sacks. The takeaways were there, and whether it be Maris Leofau or Odigizua, Micah Parsons had a great game. What did you see from this Cowboys defense that allowed them to unleash that pass rush against a quarterback that in recent weeks hadn't been sacked that much? They came into the game sort of bragging on that O-line, and yet they seemed completely overwhelmed by the Cowboys defense. What allowed them to have such a big day and such a dominant performance?
Well, let's remember that, any offensive coordinator, when he turns the film on, the first thing he's looking at, where is 11? What is 11 doing? I got a very interesting text. I'll just share this with you right in about the middle of the third quarter. And it's a friend of mine that coached in the NFL for years. And his response is, his text message was, what a freak number 11 is. I can't believe the Cowboys have paid so much money to a quarterback when they're going to have to pay that guy. It's so much harder to find. Now, we can sit here and say, hey, it's harder to find a great quarterback than it is a great defensive end. I think the point I'm making is any coordinator that flips the film on in the NFL, the first thing he looks at is how are we going to take care of 11 from a pass protection standpoint? Whether that's, are we going to block with extra tight end? We're going to keep 2 backs in the game. We're going to chip on this guy. Are we going to completely turn, or what you would feel like is slide the entire protection to number 11? Or are we going to make sure that no matter what, we are sending multiple guys his way? So having said that, early in the football game, you saw and you see Mike Zimmer, he moves, and Dan Quinn did this as well. He moves Parsons, sometimes he moves him right directly over the center. And now all of a sudden, when you're counting as an offensive lineman, and we've got, let's just say it's a 6-man protection, we've got to count who we're going to block, account for. We have to count who we're accounting for from an offensive line standpoint. So when they start moving the protection, sliding the protection, moving the nose one way or the uncovered guard one way to give help to whoever they believe is going to be blocking 11, it creates havoc then to the other side of that. So early in the game, for instance, Zimmer had Parsons over the right guard, and they were only bringing 4. It isn't as if they brought the linebackers up and brought them up tough there in the A gaps, which you see Zimmer do all the time as well. It was just a straight 4-man rush. But what happens is then the center tells the line, hey, I'm sliding over here to the right to help, and we'll have 3 guys, the center, the guard, and the tackle, block the end, and Parsons on the right side. Well, when that happens, then it creates an ability for you on the back side of that, which now is the left, to be able to run a twist stunt or an ET, or the ability to say, okay, if you're the guy over the guard on the left, you blow into that B gap, and all of a sudden the tackle has to step down. Now that end is going to loop back inside, and you're going to be able to get one-on-one matchups versus twist stunts that cause absolutely problems. When you have Odighizuwa to the backside of that, he has become a very good power rush guy. I'm talking about not just a guy that blows off the edge with speed. I'm talking about a guy who can get into you, and then he can make his moves from a power standpoint, knowing that you're heavy one side or the other. And then that's what you saw today. You saw Zimmer create matchups by just putting and making people aware of where Micah Parsons is, and then how Micah Parsons absolutely dominates how you structure protecting the passer. And it's even a bigger problem than when Parsons is on the edge on 3rd and 9, 10, 11, 12, 3rd and 8+ situations where, hey, he is just using his speed right now to blow up the field, and then he's got a great counter move with that. And so I'm giving you a whole lot of things that I'm saying, but Mike Zimmer is doing a great job of using that. And then to the backside, he's creating havoc by running pass rushing stunts, ET stunts, TE stunts. Whoever goes first, you always give that first. So if it's the end crashing and the tackle looping, it would be an ET. If it's the tackle going and the end looping, it would be a TE. So all of those things are ways that Zimmer has created getting his better personnel on your guys. What I liked about the football game, though, was that forever we have questioned whether Mozzie Smith could really take the next step to playing in the NFL. And finally today, he had some really good plays. He had a really good tackle early in the game. And so you see that. You see Leofau step in for Overshown, punch the ball out, get a big turnover, and then on the backside, they run outside zone and Leofau shoots the gap and chases it up under there. You see Wilson making plays. And so I think it's the guys, to me, what Mike Zimmer and what his scheme is doing, it's unleashing guys that I don't believe we thought we would see the production out of that we've seen so far.
Yeah, same for Lawson. I totally get what you're saying, because then players like him become even, way more effective because of all the attention going to Micah. And I think the next step is to start, stop lining up in the neutral zone, because if you're playing a better team, you're probably not going to win getting 14 or 15 penalties. And a lot of that stuff continues to happen, and they need to get better about that, be more disciplined. But the pass rush was tremendous. And to your point, even Jordan Lewis caused a turnover, making a great play on the ball that Kendricks caught. And so a lot of big plays on the back end. McQuamu had that interception, as you saw as well. Stretch on the offensive side of the ball, Rico Dowdle, we all year we talked about the lack of a run game, the decision to come with Rico and Zeke. And, they finally, about 3 weeks ago, committed to Rico as the feature back, and it's paid off in a huge way. The last 3 or 4 games, he's put up big numbers. He's averaging over, I think, the last 3 games, 119 yards a game. He ran for 149 today. What is, besides just McCarthy finally sort of committing to it, what is allowing, how much of that is what he's doing? And then what are you seeing from this sort of makeshift offensive line where you've got several, backups in there?
Yeah, that's the key, is the job that Mike Solari, the offensive line coach, has done with Hoffmans, with Bass, with Adoga. These guys who were second string guys, but now because of BB being out, because of Martin being out, because of Guyton and somewhat his lack of making the move the way they thought he could make the move into pro football, you're getting contributions up front from guys who are coming off the football. They're physical coming off the football, and then that allows you in turn to be able to have a run game. And I'll give a lot of credit to Mike McCarthy, because I believe, going back to the Houston Texans game, he would really, as an offensive guy, he'd like to drop back and throw it 55 times a game. That's how he kind of likes to call a game. He likes to call a game throwing the ball to set up the run. Well, now that you have a backup quarterback who, give him credit, he threw 3 touchdown passes today, but he is not NFL accurate with the football. And so with that being said, you have to get him out on the move. You have to boot. You have to waggle him in the way that he threw the touchdowns today, getting outside the pocket and extending the play a little bit, and then pushing the football down the field. Well, in order to do that, in order to do those kind of things, you've got to get defenses cheating up, bringing their safeties down in order to stop the run. And when you can get a hat on a hat up front, be physical up front, and by the way, the tight ends did a great job too. I mean, Soonmaker, Ferguson, Spanford, I mean, they're doing a heck of a job of coming off the football and getting a hat on a hat, and even being able to use Lipke some in 2 running back situations. So with all of that, Mike McCarthy has become absolutely, I think, dangerous as a play caller, because he's running the football and they're having success running the football because of this offensive line that Mike Solari's put together, because of tight ends who are coming off the football. And give credit to Rico Dowdle. He's running the football hard. I'm going to give credit to Kevontae Turpin. They put him at running back twice, and I think he had 24, 25 yards rushing the football out of I mean, out of a true running back set, it wasn't handing him the ball on jet sweeps. I mean, he's lined up in the backfield. And then on a third and critical situation, they put Zeke up there at fullback in a kind of an inadvertent wishbone look on a fullback pop. And so I think McCarthy deserves credit. I think the offensive line deserves credit. I think the quarterback is a functional quarterback when they can run the football. And I think that's what they've decided. And that's what Mike McCarthy is at least being committed to, is calling the run and knowing we're better offensively and we are keeping our defense off the field when we don't get in these situations where we go 3 and out, where we can make some first downs, get a field goal kicker in range where anything under 60 he's going to hit, and having the confidence in all of that and knowing that he's confident to call the run. And I know the first response from him is going to be, hey, I like to run the ball as long as we can get 4 yards on first down. Well, that's what you're doing right now. You're seeing a team that is able to get themselves in position to be 2nd and 5, 2nd and 4. And all of a sudden, it's a lot easier to call a football game when you're in those, when you're in those type of situations.
Made some great plays on 3rd down today. And generally, Stretch, one things we complain about sometimes is like, you're 3rd and relatively short. Do you need to throw it that far downfield? And yet they converted on some of those. And part of that is CeeDee Lamb. And even that touchdown wasn't a great throw, but he was able to kind of from his on the ground make a great catch there for the touchdown. And so you got to help out your quarterback in those situations. And good for Brooks and good for Tolbert for making those catches in that game. And they kind of picked on one of their old friends there. Xavier was running around in the end zone. Xavier Woods, I believe. And so, Stretch, I appreciate it. Hope you have a great night on TV. Happy holidays to you. As the Cowboys next week will have Tampa coming in. And, 6-8, I think, Stretch, it would be easy. You heard them talk about it on TV today. You kind of wonder what it would feel like if they had just been able to take that game last week. It's kind of, it makes that one even tougher to digest, knowing what the situation could be now. But they are what they are, and they're 6-8, and they're still playing hard for this head coach. So I appreciate it, sir.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. They're still continuing to play really hard. I mean, they're bought in. They've got some pride about them, and you got to give the credit to McCarthy and Zimmer. And hey, they do continue to play hard and put themselves in position to win football games with a backup quarterback, and that's hard to do in the NFL. It really is. I mean, it's hard to do. So, yeah, Mosley, happy holidays to you. I hope you get yourself some Christmas shopping. I know how organized you are, and I'm sure it is. You have got the list, and you are absolutely just checking it off and going to click it down because you are not a guy that's going to be in the malls, headed towards next week and Christmas Day. So I'm sure you're doing an unbelievable job with it.
There's no way I'll procrastinate on that, and I even have something in mind for you. A little holiday bonus is what we'll call that. But thank you, Stretch. It is Glenn Stretch Smith on Stretch Plays. Yes, and always good to hear from Stretch with his Stretch Plays. And speaking of Stretch Plays, Ed, it was kind of nice to see Cowboys tried some stuff with Turpin back there in the backfield. Both times they did it, it worked extremely well. And then, of course, Dowdle ends up with 149 rushing yards. So I know it's not in his DNA. And, Mike, we're never going to – you can't trust McCarthy to stick with the run. There was even a time, like I think it was in the first half, when it's like, what are you doing? Like they had, like a 12-yard run. They're running the ball beautifully. Even Zeke's in there running the ball, and then he goes like 3 straight passes, and then they punt. It's like,
right, you're up against a Panthers team that's the worst run defense in football, the worst scoring defense in football, and you've established effectiveness with the running game. You're playing to your strengths. You're in an ideal situation. And then again, he calls 3 consecutive passes. He just loses his way far too often for a guy who's been calling plays for almost all of his 18 seasons as an NFL head coach, and obviously as an assistant before that. And as much as he talks about the importance of running the football, he just doesn't do it. And my familiarity with him covering the Packers for so many years when Brett Favre was so prominent, and the Cowboys weren't quite so good, I would go to Lambeau Field quite a bit, and it was always the same thing. He was always talking about, you got to run the ball. We're going to run the ball 30 times. That's my goal. That's our target. And invariably he wouldn't hit it. And, that's just when he took over here. One of the first things I said was Ezekiel Elliott is done winning NFL rushing titles with this coach. It's one of the few predictions I got right, as it turns out.
By the way, you weren't happen to cover that Packers Giants game when Brett took that dive to let Strahan have his 22nd sack, were you? Okay.
No, I saw that he was confronted about that by Mark Gastineau, whose record was broken.
Mm-hmm.
It was sad. It was sad.
It was kind of sad. It was kind of strange. I did see the 30 for 30 that's come out, I don't know, I guess recently, but the New York sack exchange. And the most interesting thing to me was, as a kid, I knew Gastineau and Klecko, and you covered them. I knew how great they were, but the other members of the New York sack exchange, which was a great nickname, I didn't really know as well. And
Marty Lyons, we knew, was a good player for a long time.
I did know him, but I don't think I quite knew, the impact. And he was kind of it was just interesting because watching him and still some of the anger that he had toward Gastineau and, Klecko kind of, Mark was just a different character. And again, if you watch that, you do have some sympathy for Gastineau, but he is a weird guy.
It seemed like there was a lot of tension still among those players, and that even in their prime when they were, the most feared pass rush in football, that Klecko and Gastineau really did not get along at all.
No, and even Klecko hated all the sack dance stuff that Gastineau did. It's a funny because now it's just like expected that people are going to have their celebrations. But back then, Klecko took great pride in just getting up and going back to the huddle. There was no celebration at all, whereas Gastineau was doing all the crazy stuff. And the guy I did not remember really watching was that Abdul, who was only with them through like the 82 or 83 season. Sadly, he passed away. He is at least part of the documentary, but just passed away in October. And he was the 4th member of the New York Sack Exchange, and was really interesting. Seemed like a nice guy, but it seemed like he was the peacekeeper. He was the guy that tried to settle everybody down there and all. But
Bryce Young must have felt like he was playing against the New York Sack Exchange today. The Cowboys had 4 sacks in the third quarter alone.
Yeah. And, they had all the momentum. I thought that was weird, Ed. You and I are at a lot of these games. But when you're watching a game and they go to that halftime, and every once in a while, you're kind of like, I want to see what Jimmy says about that crazy ending to the half. And you kind of are reminded that they're trying to watch a lot of different games because they came back and their halftime analysis was that Bryce Young is playing so, it's just playing so well and looking great with the Panthers. I'm like, he had that one long pass, but he didn't do anything the whole half, and like nothing was discussed about the disastrous ending of the half for the Cowboys. It was kind of
and Jimmy's point was, if you want big plays, you got to get to CeeDee Lamb. I'm like, oh, really?
You're just like, wait, Jimmy, you're supposed to hammer the Cowboys for what you just saw. And it was like they didn't quite catch that at the end of the half. They may have been watching other things. Of course, they had to let Terry get through the highlights as only he can. Ed, okay, so, you love this. Sunday night game, they can't flex out of that?
They still could, but they're running out of time. I'm running out of time for them to flex it. Do the right thing, NFL. Flex the Cowboys and Bucks out of Sunday Night Football. I do not want to have to cover a third night game and get up at 5 in the morning and go do TV. So play the game at 3:25 where it deserves to be. So they play Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay's playing the Chargers right now. They're leading their division. Then they play at Philadelphia. Philadelphia leading its division, and then Washington here to finish the season in what might be the last game of the Mike McCarthy era. We will see.
Okay, so 2 of those 3 games, Ed and I will be in position, and then Ed, that Eagles game, I'll have made my way to Houston. I'll be able to obviously do the podcast from there, but the Cowboys will be in Philly, and I'll be getting ready, Ed, for the battle that most of America will be getting ready for on New Year's Eve, and that's Baylor versus LSU. All right. Huge matchup. Okay.
Sure.
People can see that face you're making.
I hope so.
We are.
I just hope you see it. I don't care if they see it. I want you to see it.
That's right. Ed, anything else to add? I was waiting today for like the special teams, nutty special teams play of the day. The thing that was amusing to me was that Johnny Hecker, who Bones Fossil used to be with, and has thrown a whopping like 30-something passes.
With a very high percentage.
Yeah, he's good.
Unlike Brian Anger.
I think Johnny Hecker's like 16 to 25.
Yeah, they played it all straight up on special teams today. I guess John Fossil got the message from Jerry last week.
That was one thing. There's a lot of changes that may not happen. McCarthy might be back, but
and that's fine.
After listening,
I have no problem with Mike McCarthy.
I was going to say
he's done a good job.
But the point I was going to make was that after listening to Jerry last week, the one guy may not be back is Bones. I think he's tired of all that stuff.
Well, the funny thing is I think the unanimous opinion in the media, as we've talked off the record amongst ourselves during games and waiting press conferences, when things were most bleak for the Cowboys, and we wondered whether Mike McCarthy might get fired during the season and join Wade Phillips as the only coach Jerry's ever fired during the season. It was like, well, who would be the interim? And I think almost everybody decided, well, as bad as the defense is playing, despite his experience and success as a head coach, I think it would have to not be Mike Zimmer. I think it would have to be John Fossil, who was in that role once before. But after all the bad special teams plays they've had this year, I don't see that happening.
No, and his old buddy Hecker, who was punting for the Panthers today, was like getting involved in everything. He was like making hits on the sideline, then getting involved in scrums.
You gotta do it. You gotta fight on the sideline between a 155-pound returner and a punter.
Yeah.
But the punter might outweigh him by 80 pounds.
Oh, the punter's like 6'5", 230. He's a big dude. Yeah. With a great arm. I mean, I honestly, if I'm the Panthers, I'd feel better with him throwing it than Bryce. Oh man, did you see? By the way, I know we need to go, but did you see that one that he fluttered? The announcers were trying to be nice. They're like, that ball just kind of shot out of his hand. And
he lost his grip on that one. Nobody hit him or anything. He tried to throw a ball to the sideline. The ball just sailed on him. It just like completely it was like 10 feet too high for the receiver. And I know everybody's trying to be nice about this kid. He's like, he's getting another try. He's playing so much better, but he's not playing well enough to be thought of still as like the franchise quarterback. And his team's going to have a top 5 pick again this year. Yeah. So we'll see what they decide to do. They were eliminated today, and Dave Canales, the first-year head coach there, did reiterate that Bryce Young remains the starting quarterback. So the Cowboys had a good day when their opponent has been eliminated from the playoff chase, and the head coach is still supporting his starting quarterback.
Do you know the mascot name for the Panthers? The Panthers mascot? Do you know his name?
I do. You want me to say it, or you want to say it?
Sir
Purr.
Sir Purr.
Sir Purr.
I like Sir Purr. I like that one Jacksonville. That's the only one thing I like about the Jaguars organization. I like that Jackson DeVille or whatever. Jackson DeVille. I like him. Just kind of a big wobbly looking character, kind of like the old Philly fanatic. Okay, Ed.
We should have ended this at least 2 minutes ago and probably 10 minutes ago.
We'll cut this in post edit. We'll work this off. Thank you, Ed. Appreciate it. Good work by you. And we'll be watching your work tomorrow morning early on WFAA, about 6:30 in the morning, folks.
You love saying that, don't you?
Yeah, I do, folks. Plan their mornings around. A lot of people do watch morning.
And I'll see you next
TV.
Sunday night if the NFL does the wrong thing and doesn't flex this game.
I know. Rogue Media Network. Thank you, Mike Hamilton. Thank you, Corey Dickman, the whole gang at Rogue. And thank you, Ed Warder. I am Matt Mosley. This has been the Doomsday Podcast.
We are Rogue Media Sports.